So to get things started today, I have a confession to make. And despite what Curtis just shared in that awesome rap video, my name is not actually Emma. My name is Emalea. And for me to do justice in the topic that we're going to be talking about today, in using social media as a tool for strategic growth within your career, I have to do what Amy was talking about and get authentic with all of you and share much more of my personal story than I typically do when I'm up on stage doing keynotes, talking about digital transformation or the insurance industry. So we're going to go pretty far back with that intro.
It all started when my mom met my dad, and they fell in love, and they had me. Hi, I'm Ryan.
So beyond pointing out that I was quite possibly the fattest baby you've ever seen, the point here is that I want to share much more of my personal story with all of you so you can understand the true impact that social media as a strategic tool, and I'm going to say that a few times today, played for me as an individual as well as in my career and really accomplishing goals that were never on my bingo card 5 years ago. And so we're going to start from the very beginning. Back in the 1970s, those two wonderful people that I showed you in that video, my mom and my dad, met at UW-Madison, and my mom was a dance major, and my dad was an art major. And they got married, they fell in love, they moved down to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and opened up a glass-blowing studio. And they had my two older brothers, and then in 1990, Emalea came to the scene, and I fit perfectly into this puzzle of this wildly creative and passionate family. And growing up, most of my weekends were spent behind that table at the plaza in Santa Fe when they would have weekly art shows. And as any good, free-loving, free-range hippie child, I was left to my own devices probably a little bit more than I should have been, especially being the third child. Like the time they left me alone with scissors, and I thought bangs would look good. And I know that this is really grainy, but I promise that haircut was just as bad as it looks in that picture. But I also was running around with my brothers, causing all sorts of problems and making up games and nicknames for one another. And the two that I still hear on a regular basis, like this weekend when I see my brothers, there will be reference to Motorcycle Mama and Miss Piggy. And I was known as this fiery little Leo child, which personally I think is code for I was really good at doing the pinch and run. So I would do those nasty little twisty pinches on my older brothers and then take off and go hide in a tree. And I still remember vividly at probably 4 or 5 sitting up in a tree and that pit in my stomach, hearing my mom say I was going to be in such big trouble when I came home and wondering if I was ever going to come down. And I have all of these, again, great memories of running around wild and free. But there was also this time in my life when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, was incredibly tumultuous for my family. And it was during some of my most formative years. And so my parents and their glass-blowing business were actually incredibly successful. This is a newspaper article highlighting that they were commissioned by the First Lady and President Clinton to make a line of perfume bottles for all of the living First Ladies. In terms of running a successful business, they were doing pretty good for a while. But around a year after this happened, it became pretty clear that the cards weren't stacked in their favor in terms of being successful business owners. And there was a couple of things that happened, but most notably, when I was 5 years old, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that would be incredibly difficult for any family to go through. But that actually wasn't the true challenge for us. What it was is that illness was a catalyst that only exacerbated my mom's other diagnosis. And she had what was called schizoaffective bipolar disorder. And for anybody that's not familiar with bipolar, it's a mental illness that's categorized between having these really, really high highs called manias and dipping back into incredibly low depressive states. And so kind of going back and forth between these emotional swings. Now, as you can imagine, something like being diagnosed with cancer, having those treatments, and needing to try and keep a business afloat and have 3 kids. All of that stress really started to exacerbate her mental illness. And specifically, the part of hers that was probably the most challenging for us was that schizoaffective part of her bipolar disorder. So what that means is when she was in her mania states, she would have symptoms similar to schizophrenia. So delusions, hallucinations. So for example, I just shared with all of you, my name is Ema. I've never admitted this on a stage, but my name is Ema because while my mom was pregnant with me, she was absolutely certain that I was an intergalactic princess. And I needed to have a name that was fit for space royalty. And so for a long time, that was something that ended up kind of being embarrassing for me. And I obviously go by Emma, and I didn't want people to know that story and that background. And part of it is because around this time in my life, while we were going through all of these incredibly challenging things, I started to change my persona. And that free-spirited, happy little girl that was running around and only ever wore her red cowboy boots anywhere became much more focused on hard things in life and things like finances or what would happen to our family if something happened to my mom and my dad and they were no longer with us. And you can see here that I am by far the youngest of my 3 siblings. My older brother is 10 years older than me, and my middle brother is 5 years older. But from age 5 on, instead of being this wild, free-spirited little girl, I became the practical one. I became the one that focused on all of these things that were far too mature for me at that age. For example, when I was 5 years old, around the time that we found out about my mom's cancer, I sat my aunt and my uncle down for a family meeting, and I talked to them, not actually understanding wills or guardianship or anything along those lines, about what was going to happen if my mom and dad were no longer around. My aunt was my godmother, and my uncle was my oldest brother's godfather, and I didn't want my middle brother to be separated. So I sat them down and I had a conversation with my 2 older brothers and my aunt and uncle at the table and made them pinky promise, because I was 5, that they would in fact take all 3 of us if something happened. And again, those types of thought processes and that up and down of my childhood made me start thinking from a really young age that if I did everything perfectly, and I followed all the rules, and I did everything that a practical, good person would do, my life would be smooth sailing. And I wouldn't run into the same challenges that I did when I was growing up. And looking back at my family, my oldest brother went on to be an actor and starred in like every play he auditioned for all through high school and college. My middle brother went on to be a journalist and a writer, and he's wildly creative. And I went into insurance. And jokes about our industry aside, this pattern continued throughout my entire life. So by the time that I was 14 in these pictures, I played multiple sports. I was on the leadership of every single club that I was a part of. I had straight A's. I had a job. You name a box that was in front of me to check, and I was checking it because that is what I was supposed to do. And that stayed with me for my entire life. So when it was time to go to college, I went to school to be a teacher because that's what people told me that I should do, because I liked kids and I was smart and I was good at speaking. Well, spoiler alert, there are other career paths that will give me the opportunity to speak. But I went into teaching because that was what I was told to do. Eventually, when my career took some twists and turns and I started looking at different options, I went into sales because my husband told me he thought that that would be something that I'd be good at. And this is not me saying that I regret any of the decisions that I made or the path that has brought me to where I am here, but it's to prove to all of you that I stopped taking an active role in a lot of different decisions in my life and in my career in the chase of checking boxes and making other people happy. And I always joke that I'm a recovered people pleaser, but that was what I was focused on for far too long. And when I first started my sales career, I actually reached a point where I was incredibly successful. I was the top sales rep in my company, and I had been in that role for about 5 years, but it still never felt right to me. I was good at it because I did what I was told, and I had, on the surface level, become very successful. I was making great money, everyone was happy with my performance, but it didn't feel like my career until about 4 years ago. And during COVID, we can all kind of remember back to those early days, right around the time when we realized that like 15 days to slow the spread was in fact not real life, and we were going to be in this for a long time. My husband and I were sitting at our kitchen counter, and I was talking to him about like, how do I hit my sales quota? How do I do this when nobody knows how to be successful? Whose direction do I follow? And it was during that conversation that I realized that I didn't have anybody to give me a blueprint anymore. I had to figure it out. Beginning of COVID, it gave me a weird sense of freedom because it gave me the permission to be creative. It gave me the permission to try things differently because all of these people that I looked to that had decades of experience had no idea what to do either. Nobody knew what the world was going to turn into or how we were going to be successful. And I turned to social media and decided to start making video content for my prospects and my customers to continue to educate them and see if that was something that was going to lead me anywhere. Because at that point, I was cold calling people and reaching full voicemail boxes, not getting responses to things. Webinars weren't really effective because everyone and their mom were doing them. And so I needed to try something different. And while I made that switch from passive to active in my career and started leaning into social media, I recognized that my motivation for the work that I was doing was no longer focused on that people-pleasing side. I was no longer checking boxes for other people. I was actually actively doing things that other people were uncomfortable with, and I got motivated intrinsically by the work that I was doing. And there is a psychological theory called self-determination theory, and it tells us that there are 3 things that you need to be internally motivated by the work that you do. First is a sense of autonomy, and recognizing that you are in control of the work that you do, the decisions that you make, and the actions that you take. The next one is relatedness, which is that sense of community and connection with people that you work with or work around, and really feeling like you have a tribe in what you do. And the last is competence, which really comes back to the idea of how much you believe in your effectiveness within the work that you do. And for me, switching into kind of this social selling mentality and leaning into social media as a strategic tool gave me all 3 of those. I became autonomous in the work that I was doing because suddenly when I was engaging with people on social media or creating content, I got to be in control of what was being created, and it forced me to come up with my own stances and my own beliefs and my own thoughts on my industry. There's a really easy connection to make to that relatedness when you start looking at social networks and using them as a way to build community. I met people from around the world that gave me insights into things that like no way could I have experienced at that point within the 30 years of my life. I was able to connect with these people and ask them questions and learn from them. I started an interview series where I sat down with CEOs and leaders from companies of all different shapes and sizes across the world and got to learn their insights into leadership and how to successfully manage change and large-scale digital transformations. And then through that combination of that autonomy and that relatedness and those interactions with people, I started to realize my own competence. that I never gave myself the chance to recognize. I never looked at myself as an expert. I looked at myself as the salesperson that would bring in other people to support me. And yeah, I knew a thing or two, but I wasn't the expert. I was too young for that. There were other people that could tell me what to do and how to be successful. And so through using social media as a strategic part of my career, I was all of a sudden able to feel motivated for the work that I do in a completely different way than I ever have before. And now I get the opportunity to stand up here on stage with all of you guys and introduce myself as the co-founder of my own company, Roloff Consulting. I get to tell you that I'm a keynote speaker as I stand here on stage. I can tell you that I'm a digital transformation expert, I'm a change management expert, and a digital growth expert because I have honed those skills and been able to validate my competence in all of those fields through my work on social media. And so what I want to do today is give you all the tools to start to reshape your relationship with social media so that you can do the same thing for your career. And I know that this audience has all sorts of varying levels of experience, but every single one of you has a goal of where you want to be in 5 years. Every single one of you has a goal for how you want to help your business or your own career grow. And so while some of this is going to be focused on maybe your personal brand and your individual presence on social media, this also pertains to how do we get more people into the insurance industry? This pertains to how do we change the narrative around our industry being one big scam into the place that we all are building our careers. These tools are going to help us do all of those things. Find better people, retain those people, and then build the career of your dreams, regardless of which part of the value chain within insurance you sit in.